Welcome back to another episode of the Outsider Sports Baseball Podcast. Corey Jason here, back again. Took last week off, but I'm here and I'm ready to go for some September baseball. John Pauline here with me. And John, how was it without me last week? I know my presence is always warm and endearing.
We got through it. We had Middle Injustice, but we were able to make it through without you. It was hard though. It was difficult,
Oh, I'm
but
sure it was hard.
we missed you
I wouldn't have
as
it.
we always do, of course. And we missed Dylan too.
Oh, always missing Dylan. I'm glad you and Ben were able to hold down the fort. Holiday weekend, just a long week, lots of stuff to get done once you get into, the September, you have NFL season, college football, people's schedules start to take a different shape. And you know what? Sometimes you can't make everything work. But, I'm glad I'm back here today for this one. But let's get right to it. Ronald Acuna Jr., John, he just hit his 36th home run at the time of recording this, along with having 65 steals. 40-40 seems like is a foregone conclusion. And honestly, 40-70 seems like it's just, right there for the taking, should be fairly easy to get. And that would be the first 40-70 season in history, I believe. What do you think his ceiling is, not just for this year, but also just next year too? Because he's somebody who this rule change has really greatly affected, where the shorter base paths, because you largen the bases, he's able to steal more. What could his ceiling be?
It's hard to say because I think this is obviously the first season with the rule changes, and I'm not sure teams and pitchers have fully adjusted to these rule changes. So I mean, for all we know, this could be his ceiling right here we're seeing, but it also could be more higher. I think this is probably. I don't think he's going to be able to do this next year. I feel like what he's doing right now is just something special. I mean, it's not out of the possibility that he does this again next year and just many years to come. But I feel like teams and pitchers are going to start to adjust to this stuff and maybe get more of a game plan together to maybe slow down him stealing bases and just players in general slowing down stealing. But I mean, I think he's probably going to hit the 40-70 easy. I would almost bet on that as a thing. But I mean, I don't know if you're going to see him do this again. I mean, because I mean, you look at last year when Judge hit all, like what's all how many homers did he hit, all the home runs?
62.
60 when Judge hit 62 home runs, and it's like you look so good, and you're like, you want to say you can do that again next year and keep going, but it's like
Yeah.
I don't think people realize it's hard to do, and they just make some of these players are just so good they make it look so easy. They make it look so easy, but it's actually so
Cunha is
difficult.
one of them. Yeah. I think you're right. I think this is probably his ceiling for this because it's just a perfect storm of health, power, being well protected on such a good team, and then also the ability to steal. Now, 40-70 should be right there. I don't think he'll get to 80 steals on the season, especially if they're closing down the pennant race. I don't see a need for them to one run him and risk injury. And two, he should probably be getting some more off days once they clinch the pennant,
Yeah,
because
they'd probably want to give him some rest.
once they clinch the division and they get the one seed, they should just rest him a little extra, make sure he's got fresh legs for October. There's no need to. And it's not like he's on this historic run like the Yankees last year when Judge was staring 60 and 60 plus down the barrel. They were in a big race, but he was chasing something so historic, the most home runs by a non-steroid alleged player in history. So that's something that's a big deal. Obviously, the American League home run record too at the time. So that's something that they kept him in every day. And that was to the detriment of the team in October too, because you saw he was just gassed by the end and heading into the beginning of the playoffs. So hopefully the Braves take note of that and rest Acuna. But I think you're right. 40-70 is probably the cap of what he can do. But that's not to say he can't have another 40-40, 40-50, 40-60 season. But I just can't imagine 40-80, 50-70, maybe a 50-60, 50-50 season. 50-50 would still be an incredible season, if not more impressive than this.
I just think it's just like a perfect storm, as you were saying, this year with all the stuff going on. But I mean, it's very plausible that he keeps this up, and I mean, even the 40-80, I mean, is not out of the question either. Like you can't completely rule that out.
Yeah, you can't. It's just it's just so incredible what we're seeing him do. Now, just going on to seeing somebody we don't know what they can do. The Cubs are calling up their top prospect, Pete Crow Armstrong. Now, they got him from the Mets for Javier Baez. And it's going to be really interesting to see what he does because the Cubs, they're still in a playoff race here. They got stuff to do. And quite frankly, you're just throwing them into the fire. As we stand right now, the Cubs are 2 out of the top wild card. They're firmly in that second wild card. They're just a game and a half actually behind Philadelphia for the top spot. So they're throwing this guy into the fire right now. Do you have expectations for him?
I don't really have expectations for him. I think the Cubs are kind of doing a little trial by fire here and just maybe seeing what he has. I mean, you're hoping it's not too high pressure for him and he doesn't, choke under the under I guess what they're like asking of him. Because I'm
Yeah.
assuming Cubs fans, wanted to come in and do really, really well, but it's just wait and see kind of thing. But I think the Cubs kind of need him.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a good addition. I don't believe he's eligible for a postseason roster, though. There's a lot of interesting and intricate parts to that rule because if he's up due to an injury, and since he was with the organization before September 1st, he could be eligible. But if they don't make an injury designation to somebody else, he's ineligible. It's very odd stuff that we'll go over more in detail once these playoff rosters are made and we have to kind of talk through these type of roster construction moves. Now, a couple UCL injuries, and we all know as baseball fans, UCL synonymous with two other letters. That's TJ, Tommy, John. With the most important guy designated with a UCL injury, we're going to go Felix Bautista, the star reliever for the Orioles, who are big pennant race, looking to be a World Series, contender. He's got a partial UCL tear. He's been out a couple weeks, but he's hopeful to pitch again this year. And that's obviously with some rest, some rehab. He doesn't have to get reconstruction surgery, at least not now. That might be something he puts off until the off season. But it's going to be interesting to see how useful and how well he can pitch with this type of injury. But then on the flip side, a team not really in contention for anything that brought up the young kids, you have the Yankees with their star center fielder, their 20-year-old prospect, Jason Dominguez, the Martian. He came up, he saw the Astros, he conquered, and he left us. Full UCL tear. Felt a little pain on Sunday during his third career game against the Astros last week. Didn't say anything to the Yankees until Wednesday in their finale against the Tigers. And then, the Yankees decided Sunday this past week when they were finishing up their series against the Brewers to, end his season. They scratched him they thought it was just soreness. Turned out it was more. The timing sucks. He's going to be out into 2024 now. What was promising debut just turned into just dust in our hands. But John, Bryce Harper, he tore his UCL and got Tommy John right after the World Series, right?
Yeah.
So what was that like when you first found out that he was playing with it? And then how was that rehab? Because he rehabbed up on the major league team, basically. What did he look like in your mind the first, month or so before he really got going? And how long did it take for him to get back to normal?
Well, I mean, obviously when he came up, you can tell he didn't have the power he had before the injury. Like he just wasn't hitting the home runs. He was hitting for average. Like he was still hitting the ball, but there was no power behind it. And it took him, I mean, it took him up until probably about a month ago for him to start hitting homers again and get the power back finally. So it seems like the injury didn't set him back that far, and I expect him to be, back to 100% Bryce Harper next year. But I think his days in right field are over. because it took him, even though he was up hitting earlier in the season, it took him a while to be out in the field again and playing. And he made the move to first base, obviously, because I think after that, I think after the surgery, I think he can't make that, the long throw from right field to home, and you don't want him getting hurt again and aggravating an injury. So I mean, with Dominguez, you might be looking at something similar where comes back and hits for a while, but it might be a while till you see him back in the field, and he might be making a position change. He might be playing maybe up in the infield somewhere or DH.
Yeah, definitely not something that's even feasible for the Yankees to have. He's 20 years old. I think Harper, though, was also a good storm because you had Rhys Hoskins' injury. If Rhys Hoskins was here this whole year, Harper definitely wouldn't be at first base. He'd be probably DHing more. I'm sure we'll see him in right field next year. They're just trying to take it easy with him now, but you have a mixed bag when it comes to position players and Tommy John. Gleyber Torres of the Yankees, he got Tommy John the year before he debuted. He tore his UCL sliding into home plate. He came up, tore the cover off the ball, had no power loss. That was a year after he tore it. You have guys like Travis d'Arnaud, who was a catcher. He he showed all the promise he had as a prospect after the Tommy John. He was kind of iffy. You didn't know what he was. Then he gets Tommy John and he starts playing really well. But guys like Salvador Perez missed 18 months. Just you don't know what it is. There's lots of outliers. Didi Gregorius, we both know him well from our teams. He got Tommy John and was never the same. So it's tough. Dominguez being so young and his body's still developing at that, it's going to be tough to see what happens. I don't anticipate we see him in the majors until the end of next season, but that's not to say he won't be playing. He'll be in the minors rehabbing because why rush him at that point?
Yeah.
He's 20 years old. He'll be 21 next year. The going rate for a position player is about 9 to 10 months, I believe. Harper came back in 5, but he had the full offseason, and timing is also important. If Dominguez gets the surgery now, that puts him on track to, at least on the generic timetable, be back in June, maybe the All-Star break. But if he, works hard like Harper and is a dog, he could be back opening day and then DHing, which is tough because the Yankees don't have an open DH spot. But he should hopefully be able to get back to playing the field sooner than later. And luckily for him, one of his biggest attributes, not only his power, but he's got such an incredible eye at the plate. So he'll be able to work a lot of counts. And if he's not going to hit for average, which he doesn't always do, he'll still be able to get on base and help out a team. So Dominguez it sucks, but it is what it is. And hopefully he gets better soon. But let's get into talking to some postseason races, right? So in the American League, Baltimore's got the 1 spot right now. They're leading their division. Houston's leading the West. Minnesota's leading the Central. That's 1, 2, and 3. The wild card, though, you get 3 wild card teams. Tampa Bay has the first wild card, and they are up 7.5 games on Toronto, who's got the 2nd spot. Toronto is up 1 game on Seattle. So again, your wild card teams, Tampa, Toronto, Seattle, that is the 4, 5, and 6 seeds. But you got 2 teams waiting in the wings. The Rangers are only a half game out of that 3rd wild card spot. And, Boston is 6 out. Now, it's tough to take 6 games out at this point seriously, but it's still there to mention that Boston is there 6 games out. John, at this rate, what do you see shaking out? Is there any teams that are even further out you can see going on a run? Does Boston have it in them? Or is this kind of how things are going to stay?
I feel like for the most parts, the divisions are going to stay the same. I think you're going to see, Orioles at the top, the Twins stay at the top, and I think the Astros are going to stay at the top there. I don't think that's going to get shaken up too much. But the wild card, I mean, I feel like the Rays are going to stay there. I feel like the Blue Jays probably could hold it there. Maybe the Mariners. I think it's almost that, but I think really it's what the Rangers are going to do. That's the big question mark here out of the big thing. Because I mean, the Red Sox, they're there, but I don't think it's like, I don't know if you want to really take them seriously, but
Yeah,
you can still talk about them. But I think the biggest part is if the Rangers can get it together, and then it's if the Rangers do get it together, which team falls out, the Blue Jays or the Mariners?
right. Not to mention, though, there's also that division race. So just looking at that AL West, Houston's up 3 games on Texas, and Texas is in third. Houston's up 2.5 on the Astros. So 3 games separate, the third place team from the first place team. So you don't only have the wild card race to look at, you also have the divisional race as well.
So I guess but I mean, if the Rangers get it together, I mean, they can. If Houston, I mean, obviously cools off and slows down a bit. I mean,
Yeah,
they can very easily take that division spot, and then you're looking at the Astros in the wild card race. But then again, it's just like who gets knocked out? Is it
right.
the Blue Jays or the man?
Yeah, who's going to be the short end? Because
Who's getting the short end there? Yeah.
you also have a race in the AL East, and it's kind of surprising. Baltimore is only 3 up on Tampa for the division lead. Toronto, that other playoff team we mentioned, they're 10.5 out of the division. I think we can kind of write them off
Yeah.
that divisional race at least. But could Tampa overtake Baltimore? They're only a 3 game difference.
It's hard to say. I mean, like, you almost feel like at this point in the season, like 3 games just feels like kind of a lot
They do play
compared.
4 against each other before the season's up.
Well, I guess that series is probably going to decide who's going to take the division there.
Yeah.
Because I
So
mean, a sweep from either team pretty much, I think, clinches that
guarantees
division.
a guarantees a flip. And we'll talk a little bit more about the tiebreakers and all that in a little bit. But on the National League side, Atlanta, the Dodgers, and Milwaukee are leading their divisions. Atlanta 16 games up on the Phillies, no contest there. Milwaukee 3 up on the Cubs, 6.5 up on the Reds. It should be Milwaukee's to lose, but there are still some question marks left in the NL Central. Then in the West, the Dodgers are 13 up on Arizona. Arizona was a nice story leading the division as late as they did, but nothing there. Wild card wise, though, you have Philadelphia in the first wild card spot, the Cubs in the second, only a game and a half separate them. Then Arizona in the final wild card spot. They're 2 games back of the Cubs, but you have 3 other teams vying for that wild card. Miami, a half game back of Arizona, San Fran, a game and a half back, and Cincinnati, a game and a half back. So you got 3 teams, really 4 if you're going to call Arizona Miami tie. That's a half game difference that are going right there. We don't really know what the protocol here is because a lot of these teams play each other. It's going to be interesting. Who do you see coming away with this right now?
Well, I feel it's obvious that, I mean, Braves win in the East, Dodgers are going to win the West. That's easy. The Central is the biggest question mark because that can go either way. I think it's either going to be the Brewers, or it's going to be the Cubs. Like you said, it's the Brewers to lose. But who's ever, going to be second at division,
Yeah,
I think, is a shoe in for the wild card. So in the wild card, you're either looking at the Cubs or the Brewers. I think
I'll agree to
it's
that one.
one of those teams. Now the third wild card spot, you can take as many guesses because I feel like just like out of the Diamondbacks, the Marlins, the Giants, and the Reds, and I feel like you'd have pretty about even chance of being correct for anyone you pick.
Yeah, it's a throw a dart at the board, right?
Yeah.
So let's go over some tiebreakers. Let's kind of where we are at now. These are what the tiebreakers are. Arizona, if them and Miami ended up tied for a wild card spot, Arizona has a better intra-division record. Now, when it comes to these wild card games, they don't go head to head. They go intra-division, meaning how you played against your own division. And Arizona's got a much better intra-division record than Miami. Arizona would end up with that nod. Dodgers own the tiebreaker over Milwaukee based on their intra-division. It's not even close. I believe that also is their head-to-head. Dodgers own that as well. And the same thing, the Braves own their tiebreaker over the Dodgers. So the Dodgers and Braves, you kind of know what's going on with them. But going to the American League side of things, you get a little bit more question. Texas, they're 23-19 in intra-division. They would have a worse record in that than Baltimore, who's 28-16. So if Texas and Baltimore tied for a wild card spot as we stand now, Baltimore would have that edge over Texas. And Seattle, they have the best intra-division record of any team. So if Seattle's got a tie for any wild card spot, Seattle would right now automatically win it because they have a the best entry division record in all of the American League. Toronto, they got a 12-25 entry division record. They got one of the worst ones of all these playoff teams. They would lose to everybody virtually, so they are kind of hoping that they have a spot without a tie. The Rays, they're 24-16 intra division, but that puts them slightly behind Houston. So if the Rays and Houston ended up tied at the end of the year, Houston would get the nod right now over the Rays. But obviously, there's more intra division games happening, but that's kind of where we're at now. And there's only a couple more weeks left, so you kind of this isn't useless information. This is kind of where you start to formulate all these playoff scenarios and possibilities. Now, the American League East, the real close, probably the one of the closest races that you didn't think that was that close. The Orioles, they host Tampa Bay for 4 games. To win that division, Orioles would need to get one more win to clinch the head-to-head tiebreaker over Tampa. They just need to go 1-3 in those 4 games. So a sweep for Tampa would be huge because that would swing the pendulum the other way, where Tampa would now have the tiebreaker over Baltimore. And if that's the case, there's some interesting stuff going down. But let's enough of the playoffs, enough of all that talk. There's plenty more for that in the coming weeks. Let's get into studs and duds. I know, John, this is your favorite segment. For me, my stud, I'm going to go Cubs starting pitcher Justin Steele. In 15 innings, he went 1-0, gave up 8 hits, 1 earned run, 2 walks, and had 18 strikeouts. Just a dominating performance over his 2 starts. But my dud kind of was the opposite. Jesse Schultens, the White Sox starter reliever, does a little both for them. 8 2/3 of an inning, 0-2, 17 hits, 3 walks, 5 strikeouts, 8 earned runs. Just a truly terrible week for him. And, I always like to single out these pitchers when we do this because these guys don't get enough love. And if we're not going to show them love, might as well show them something because bad press is still press, right? All
Yeah,
press is press.
if you're there, any publicity is good publicity.
Exactly.
That's the thing.
So get him out there. But who do you got as your stud and who's your dud?
Well, my stud is one of my players, one of my favorite players this season. He helped me clinch a spot in the playoffs against you in
Boo.
fantasy last week.
Boo.
Arizona's pitcher Zach Gallen. He pitched a complete game shutout, went the full 9 innings, got the win.
Ben's janky rules.
He gave up 3 hits, 1 walk, 9 strikeouts. Like it's just an absolute gem of a game. And it's nice to see because he struggled. He had a few starts prior. He was struggling a little bit, so it's nice to see him bounce back. And I'm sure the Diamondbacks fans are happy to see him bounce back. Just in time for for like around the playoffs. So hopefully he just keeps going. And then my dud is Max Scherzer and possibly just the whole Texas Ranger team. Like they have just been absolutely horrendous, and especially Max Scherzer, especially their pitching. Max Scherzer only went 3 innings, got the loss, gave up 6 hits, 7 earned runs, 2 walks, 4 strikeouts. Gave up 3. He gave up 3 of those hits were home run. 3 of those hits were home runs, and one of them was a grand slam. And I believe the other pitcher, John Gray, only was able to pitch, I think, like 2.5 innings. So I mean, the Rangers are they've been so bad lately. I don't even know what to say.
Started off so well and then just
I even had him pegged to come back and win the division. I don't even know. I feel like I may have been dead wrong.
I think that's looking like you
I think
were.
I have to
That's
take the
just
thing. I was wrong.
it's tough to admit you're wrong too, but like they just cannot hold it together. But now let's go into our weekly series highlight. John, what's that one series that you want to kind of look at if we're keeping with this theme here?
Well, sticking with the Rangers theme kind of here, I'm going with Texas at Toronto, which is a really important game for the wild card and just in general for the playoffs, deciding on who's going to be in it. I mean, if the Rangers have any hopes of even making the playoffs or getting a wild card, like they really need to win this series against Toronto. And if Toronto needs to win the series too, because this is a very important series. So I guess we'll see if the Rangers can get it back together again. I think they were able to win their last game barely, but this if they see if they can turn it around against Toronto.
Yeah, for me, I got make or break time for Seattle. Seattle hosts the Dodgers, a little West Coast action over there. Dodgers firmly in the playoffs, firmly a World Series contender, probably the number 2 team behind the Braves, and that's by a wide margin in the National League. Seattle's fighting for their playoff lives. They got the Rangers still creeping there. We talked about some other things going on in the wild card. They have the division. They want the division right there. They're going to have to win games and they're going to have to beat good teams. And the Dodgers are one of those teams. If Seattle wants to seriously think that they could be World Series contenders, let alone just division contenders, because once you get to the playoffs, everybody's thinking the same thing. We want a chip. We want to hold that commissioner's trophy, prove to Rob Manfred, hey, this is not a hunk of junk. So they got to beat these teams. And the Dodgers are probably the best team they have left on their schedule because the Dodgers are a better team than the Astros, than the Rangers, than just about anybody Seattle can face outside of the Braves or the Orioles. So it's going to be a really interesting matchup to see if Seattle can hold on to that and win a couple games against a really good team. But that'll do it for us here for the Outsider Sports Baseball Podcast. Check out our stuff online, outsidersports.net, Twitter, Outsider Sports 3. Got a lot of good football stuff going on. Season's in full action now. My Giants are dead to me. YouTube, TikTok, just search up Outsider Sports. You'll be seeing a lot of stuff too. Just keep it tuning in. Hockey starting up soon. Going to get a lot of stuff going now that all the other major sports are in the way. Baseball was able to carry the brunt for over the summer, but they're going to lighten our load a little bit. Just a lot of stuff coming on where a lot of good people doing a lot of good things. So Corey, Jason, John Pauline, till next week.